Two was standing in the middle of a crowded studio, a sharp pin in my hand, and a bright red balloon between me and a guy who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. When I realized that my entire life was about to be ruined for the sake of a viral clip. I had spent 3 years building a career, a reputation, and a life, and in one single moment of televised honesty, I watched it all go up in smoke because of a guy who thinks a lab coat gives him a license to be a monster. I'm sitting here now, wondering if I should have just walked off the set the second things got weird, or if I was right to stand my ground and expose him for who he really is. Was I wrong for turning a dating show into a crime scene investigation? Or would you have done the exact same thing if you found out your date was hiding a secret that could land them in prison? I need you to listen to this entire story because what started as a pop-the-balloon date ended with me calling the police and a national scandal that is still trending. It all started about 3 months ago when my best friend, Sarah, convinced me to apply for this viral YouTube dating show called Pop the Balloon or Find Love. You've probably seen the clips. A bunch of girls stand in a line with balloons. A guy walks out, and if the girls don't like his vibe, his outfit, or his opening line, they pop their balloons. It's brutal, it's shallow, and it's exactly the kind of trashy entertainment I usually avoid. But I was going through a dry spell, and Sarah kept saying, "Maya, you're a successful architect, you're gorgeous, and you're single. Just go on for the plot. Imagine the followers you'll get for your firm." I eventually caved, thinking it would be a funny story to tell at dinner parties. I didn't realize I was signing up for a nightmare. On the day of the filming, the energy in the studio was electric, but incredibly toxic. The producers were literally whispering in our ears, telling us to be harsher, and to give the audience something to meme. There were 10 of us girls, and we were all dressed to the nines, standing under these blinding stage lights with our balloons. Before the cameras even rolled, the production assistants were handing out waivers that basically said the show wasn't responsible for any emotional distress or reputational damage. That should have been my first red flag. The atmosphere felt less like a dating show and more like a modern-day coliseum where we were the lions and the guys walking out were the gladiators. Or sometimes, it felt the other way around. The first few guys were typical, clout chasers, gym rats, guys who clearly just wanted to promote their SoundClouds. One guy walked out in a full neon tracksuit and started rapping his bio. Pop, pop, pop. The sound was deafening, like a firing squad. Another guy came out and immediately started talking about his crypto portfolio, and I didn't even wait for him to finish his sentence before I popped mine. Then the music changed. It got more professional and serious. Out walks Dr. Marcus. He was tall, wearing a tailored navy suit, and had this blindingly white smile that looked like it cost more than my car. He started talking about his career as a high-end plastic surgeon, his charity work, and his love for traditional values. He was a hit. Not a single balloon popped. He was charming, he was articulate, and he looked at me with this intensity that actually made me blush. By the end of his round, I was the one he chose. We were whisked away to a private dinner date that was being filmed by a secondary crew in a high-end restaurant they had rented out just for us. At first, the date was perfect. Marcus was attentive, he asked about my projects, and he seemed genuinely interested in my life. He spoke about his philosophy of beauty, and how he spent his weekends performing pro bono surgeries for children in developing countries. It sounded too good to be true, and as the night went on, the cracks began to show. As the wine flowed and the cameras moved slightly further back to capture natural conversation, the mask started to slip. He began making these offhanded, arrogant comments about his patients, calling them broken projects he had to fix. He laughed about how he could talk anyone into a surgery they didn't need just by pointing out a flaw they hadn't noticed yet. He looked at my face, tilted his head, and said, "You know, Maya, your bridge is slightly deviated. It's a 5-minute fix. I could make you perfect." I felt a chill go down my spine. I hadn't asked for an evaluation. It felt slimy. My gut was screaming at me that this guy was a total narcissist. But then it got worse. He started checking his phone constantly, looking agitated. A notification popped up on his screen while it was sitting face up on the table. I wasn't trying to snoop, but it was a photo. A photo of a woman who looked bruised and terrified, with a message that said, "Please don't do this." He flipped the phone over instantly, but the image was burned into my brain. I tried to play it cool, but my heart was racing. I started asking him more specific questions about his private practice, and his answers became defensive and cold. He told me that some people don't know what's good for them, and that authority requires a firm hand. He began explaining that he had a special retreat for his favorite patients where they learned discipline. The way he said it made my skin crawl. This wasn't just a bad date. I felt like I was sitting across from a predator. I noticed that the production crew was nodding and smiling behind the cameras, clearly loving the drama of our intense conversation, not realizing they were filming a confession of sorts. I felt a sense of dread as I realized that if I didn't do something, I might be the next person on that phone screen. I started thinking about all the girls back at the studio who were jealous that he picked me, and I felt a heavy responsibility to find out who this man really was. I began to wonder how many other dates he had been on from these shows. Was this his hunting ground? He had this way of looking through you, not at you, as if he was calculating your market value rather than your personality. Every time he took a sip of his wine, he watched me over the rim of the glass with these predatory, cold eyes that didn't match his warm, rehearsed smile. I tried to bring up the news, hoping to see his reaction to stories about justice or ethics, but he brushed it all off as noise for the masses. He truly believed he was above the law, above morality, and certainly above the peasants he claimed to serve. The restaurant, which initially felt romantic, now felt like a cage. The soft jazz playing in the background felt like a funeral march. I knew I couldn't just finish the dessert and go home. If I did, I would never sleep again. I needed to know what was on that phone, and I needed to know if that woman in the photo was still alive. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was on a film date for a massive YouTube channel, sitting across from a guy the whole world thought was a dream man, while I was looking at evidence of something potentially horrific. Before I tell you what happened next, and how I blew the whole thing up, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have played along for the cameras and stayed safe? Or would you have risked everything to find out the truth? I knew that if I just walked away, he would move on to the next girl, and the next, and no one would ever know. But if I stayed, I was putting myself in direct danger with a man who clearly had a lot to lose and the resources to protect himself. I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to let this slide. I pretended I had to go to the restroom, but instead, I circled back to where our coats were being held by the production assistants. They were busy setting up the next shot, and weren't paying attention. I managed to find his blazer, and in the pocket was a second phone, a burner. It wasn't locked. I know it's illegal to snoop, but my adrenaline was through the roof. What I found was a gallery full of before and after photos, but not for plastic surgery. They were photos of women he was training in some sort of twisted, underground cult-like lifestyle group he ran on the side. There were bank transfers, threats, and addresses. He wasn't just a doctor. He was a leader of a high-end extortion ring targeting vulnerable women who came to his clinic. He would perform surgeries, then use the medical records and confessions they made under anesthesia to blackmail them for thousands of dollars. I saw a thread of messages where he was coordinating a meeting for later that night at a warehouse downtown. The messages were sickening. He referred to these women as inventory, and talked about liquidating those who couldn't pay. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a doctor with a big ego. This was a monster running a human trafficking and extortion business right under the nose of the medical board. I saw photos of legal documents, forged signatures, and even pictures of him standing over unconscious patients with a triumphant, sickening look on his face. I realized the Pop the Balloon show was just a way for him to find his next victim. Someone successful, single, and looking for love. He targeted women with high net worths or influential careers, so he could have more leverage. I slipped the phone back, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I felt like I was in a spy movie, but the stakes were my life and the lives of those poor women. I went back to the table, and my face must have been pale because he looked at me and asked, "Are you okay, Maya? You look like you've seen a ghost." I just smiled, a fake, plastic smile, and said I was just overwhelmed by the romance of the evening. I even leaned in and touched his hand, revolted by the contact, just to keep him from suspecting I had found his secret. I needed him to stay until the cameras were live back at the studio. I needed the maximum amount of witnesses. I spent the rest of the dinner listening to him talk about his vision for the future, knowing that his future was going to be a prison cell if I had anything to say about it. The ride back to the studio was the longest 20 minutes of my life. He tried to put his arm around me, and I had to fake a cough just to pull away without looking suspicious. When we arrived, the production staff was buzzing. They thought they had the hit of the season. They were already talking about the doctor and the architect as the new power couple of the internet. I just stood there, clutching my purse, waiting for my moment. I knew that once the red light went on, there was no turning back. I was about to set fire to his life, and potentially my own career, but I couldn't breathe until the truth was out. I waited for the cameras to start rolling for the final decision segment, the part where we go back to the stage and decide if it's a match or a pop. When we got back to the stage, the lights were brighter than ever. The audience was cheering. The host was grinning, ready for a viral, happily ever after moment. He asked Marcus first, "So Doc, is Maya the one you want to build a life with?" Marcus gave this sickeningly sweet speech about how I was perfectly proportioned and intellectually stimulating. The audience awed, like he was some kind of prince. Then the host turned to me. "Maya, you've heard the man. Is it a match, or are you popping that balloon?" I didn't just say no. I pulled out my own phone, showed the production crew the photo I had managed to snap of his burner screen, and I screamed. I told the cameras everything. I shouted the names of the women I had seen in his messages. I told the audience that this man was a predator, a blackmailer, and a fraud. Marcus went from charming doctor to rabid animal in seconds. He tried to lunge at me, his face contorted in a way that revealed the monster underneath, and the security had to tackle him to the ground. He was screaming that I was crazy, that I was a liar, but then his burner phone fell out of his pocket and slid across the floor. One of the producers picked it up, and the look on his face told the whole story. The entire set descended into absolute chaos. People were screaming, the audience was fleeing, and the host was just standing there with a dead expression, realizing his show was about to become a federal evidence file. The police arrived 20 minutes later, and they didn't just take a statement. They took Marcus away in handcuffs. They also seized all the footage from the date. It turns out, he was already under investigation by the FBI for medical fraud, but they didn't have the smoking gun burner phone or the evidence of the extortion until I pointed them to his blazer. They found out he had a secret basement in his clinic where he held sessions that were essentially torture. The magnitude of his crimes was far worse than I could have imagined. He wasn't just extorting them for money. He was trying to break their spirits. The charity work he did was a front for money laundering. The rabbit hole went so deep that the story stayed in the headlines for months. The aftermath was insane. The show tried to bury the footage, sending their lawyers to my house the next day to threaten me with a lawsuit for breach of contract and defamation. They were terrified that the show's reputation would be ruined for letting a criminal on their platform. They tried to claim that I had staged the whole thing for clout. But they were too late. One of the camera ops, someone who was just as disgusted as I was, leaked the unfiltered version of the confrontation to a major news outlet. It went viral within hours. The hashtag Dr. Death became the #1 trending topic worldwide. Marcus lost his medical license, his assets were frozen, and he's currently awaiting trial on multiple counts of extortion, assault, and illegal medical practices. He's facing 30 years to life. The girls who were being blackmailed came forward one by one, thanked me for giving them their lives back, and we've formed a sort of support group. Some of them had lost their homes, their families, and their dignity to that man. Seeing them get justice was the only thing that made the trauma of that night worth it. I lost a few friends who thought I was too dramatic and that I should have handled it privately instead of making a scene, but I don't care about them. I saved at least 3 women who were currently being blackmailed by him, and potentially dozens more who would have fallen into his trap. My architecture firm actually saw a surge in clients who wanted to support a woman of integrity. Even though the show tried to blacklist me, I learned a lot about the world of influencer culture, and how people are willing to overlook literal evil if it's wrapped in a handsome face and a high-status job. The producers of the show never apologized to me. In fact, They tried to invite me back for a redemption episode, which I declined with a very colorful letter from my lawyer. Looking back, I realized that these dating shows are built on a foundation of shallow judgments and popping balloons based on looks, which is exactly how people like Marcus hide in plain sight. They use the glitz and the glamour to mask the rot underneath. They rely on people being too polite or too scared to speak up. They count on the fact that most people will choose a comfortable lie over a dangerous truth. But I couldn't do that. I'd rather be the crazy girl who popped the balloon and started a riot than the perfect girlfriend to a monster. If there's a moral here, it's that your gut instinct is the only balloon that matters. If it pops, run. Don't worry about the cameras, don't worry about the contract, and don't worry about what the internet will say. Your safety and your soul are worth more than any viral moment. Like this video if you were on my side, and think I did the right thing by exposing him on camera. Subscribe for more stories like this where the perfect date turns into a total disaster, and people get exactly what they deserve. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Do you think the show producers should be held responsible for not vetting him properly? Or do you think they just got lucky with the ratings? I want to know if you've ever had a perfect date turn into a nightmare. Let's talk about it in the comments. I'll see you all in the next story.